You know the end of the story. You always have. You see the man on the marble slab, covered in blood that was once his life. You whisper the words, "Et tu, Brute?" It is a perfect moment of theater, a grand tragic finale. But let me tell you the truth. The murder, the knives, the shame. That was only the final betrayal. The wounds began long, long before. They began in my childhood. I was born fragile, a weakling, not the soldier you see on the coins, but a sickly Caesar with thin, sickly skin, and a voice that strained to be heard. My own name was heavy, Julius. I was a descendant of kings, and yet I stood aside while other boys wrestled in the dust, watching, observing, never participating. The great men of Rome, Sulla the dictator, they saw my famous name, but they saw no strength. They saw only a future inconvenience, a problem to be erased. They saw my youth and my alliances, and decided I was already a target. When I was barely a man, Rome was soaked in blood. Sulla, the tyrant, purified the city, writing the names of his enemies on lists that led straight to the grave. I was related to his rivals. I was a stain on his new order. My name was placed on that list. I was not yet 20. I ran. I was hunted like a dog. I hid in the muddy riverbeds, bribed nervous guards with what little silver I had, and disappeared into the countryside, sleeping under damp hay. The fear tasted like metal in my mouth. The fear was absolute. That day, I learned my first and most brutal lesson that would define my life. Ambition without power is death. To survive, I had to stop being weak. I had to stop being human. I had to become the wolf that the Republic feared. The great Sulla pardoned me in the end, but he looked at me with cold, penetrating eyes and gave a chilling prophecy to his men. He said, "Take care. In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses." He saw the future. He saw the ambition that my fear had forged into steel. The world expected me to be a casualty. But the weak boy was gone. In his place was a man obsessed with power. And power costs. I borrowed every sesterce I could lay my hands on. Every banker, every friend, every nervous relative, I squeezed them all. My debt became crushing, impossible. Why? Because I didn't buy villas or marble statues. I bought power. I bought influence. I bought the loyalty of thousands through public games, through grand speeches, through generosity designed to bind men to my will. I needed legions, not for glory yet, but to pay the price of admission to the highest offices of Rome. My life was not about luxury. It was a desperate scramble to justify my debt. And my arrogance, my famous, fatal arrogance, was born in the most ridiculous place. I was captured. Pirates, off the coast of Asia Minor. Filthy, sun-scorched men who smelled of fish and fear. They demanded 20 talents for my release, a paltry sum, an insult to the name of Caesar. I laughed. I told them, "Demand 50. I am a Caesar. I am worth more than your petty sum. You insult my family." For 38 days I lived among them. I was their prisoner, but I treated them like my subordinates. I exercised in their camp. I demanded silence when I wished to sleep. I made them listen to my poetry and my speeches. And when they dared to laugh at my terrible verses, I smiled and told them, "Enjoy your jokes, because when I am free, I will return and crucify every one of you." They laughed harder. They thought I was a brilliant, mad Roman noble enjoying his theatrics. But when my ransom arrived and I was free, I immediately raised a fleet. I did not wait for Rome. I returned to the very island where they held me. I captured every last man, and I kept my promise. I crucified them all. Every last pirate who laughed at my poetry. But because I was merciful, because they had treated me well, I first cut their throats to spare them the long suffering on the cross. Do you see the man in that moment? Not a politician, not a general. A man who was humiliated, then returned with an unstoppable vengeance. That was the mold that Rome made me from. I secured my political destiny through the first triumvirate. I joined with Pompey, the great general, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome. It was a secret pact, a marriage of three desperate powers to rule the Republic. But the personal cost was immediate. I married my daughter Julia to Pompey. She was my only child, the most precious human link I had. I sacrificed her happiness for the stability of my alliance. She was the political glue that held the three greatest egos in Rome together. And then I went to Gaul. I secured my governorship not out of greed for land, but out of necessity. I needed the wealth of conquest to pay my impossible debts. I needed the glory to silence my enemies in the Senate. I needed the army. For 8 years, 8 years in the mud, the cold, the endless forests. I marched my men across mountains, through freezing rivers, into battles against 2 million fierce, wild men who fought like demons. They speak of my strategy, but they forget the slaughter. We killed them by the hundreds of thousands. Men, women, children. The official count was over 1 million dead. My hands are still sticky with the dust of Gaul. I built monuments to my conquest with mountains of corpses. They call it conquest. I call it necessity. I chose the survival of my own ambition over the lives of millions. I created the most loyal, hardened, and deadly army the world had ever known. They didn't fight for Rome. They fought for me. They were my sons. I paid them. I stood with them in the rain. I knew their names, their scars, their weaknesses. They would have died for me without question, because I gave them one thing the Republic never would: respect. The moment I knew I had succeeded was at the siege of Alesia. We were fighting Vercingetorix, trapped inside a fortress. But then, 200,000 Gallic reinforcements arrived to rescue him. We were caught between two forces, under siege, yet simultaneously defending ourselves from a siege. It was impossible. Military theory did not allow it. But my men, my 10th Legion, they looked at me, and they did the impossible. They fought on two fronts, screaming my name, not the name of Rome. We crushed them all. 2 million souls broken against the shield of my will. But while I was gaining the world, I lost my heart. News reached me from Rome. Julia was dead. She died in childbirth, the one innocent in my web of alliances. The political bond between me and Pompey snapped. The man I had fought beside was now merely a rival. The great love of his life was gone. The glue was dissolved. The war began in that moment. In Egypt, in the arms of a queen who spoke 7 languages, who could discuss philosophy as easily as war. I found a human being. Not a Roman citizen, not a senator. Just a woman who saw me, Gaius Julius, not Caesar the dictator. I spent a year with her. A year of laughter, of sailing down the Nile, of forgetting the smell of blood and the bitter taste of ambition. I brought her back to Rome. I built a statue of her, golden, magnificent, in the Temple of Venus. My fatal mistake. I showed Rome that the man who saved their republic was vulnerable, that he could love a foreigner, that he could forget to be Rome. They saw my weakness, and weakness in Rome is a standing invitation to murder. I committed the ultimate sin, clementia. I pardoned my enemies, every single one of them. I brought them back into the Senate, back into my circle. Brutus, Cassius, Cinna, all the men who fought to kill me. I needed them to believe I was a magnanimous dictator, not a vengeful butcher. I created stability. I reformed the calendar. I rebuilt the forum. I gave land to my veterans. I did everything I could to show them that I was not a king, but the necessary cure. But they didn't want a cure. They wanted the old lie. They wanted the illusion of the republic, even if the reality was tyranny by corruption. And my fatal arrogance was this. I thought my genius protected me. I thought my generosity would buy their loyalty. I thought I was simply too big to fail. I received warning after warning. My wife, Calpurnia, dreamt of my death, begging me not to attend the Senate on the Ides of March. A servant tried to give me a letter detailing the plot. I raved him off. I was Caesar. Who would dare touch me? They gathered in the theater of Pompey. The irony was exquisite. 70 men, senators, friends, men whose careers I had saved from ruin. In Rome, they watched. Pompey, now terrified of my power, grew jealous. Cato, the stubborn, hypocritical patriot, saw me not as a savior, but as a cancer eating the soul of the republic. They demanded I disband my army. They demanded I return to Rome as a private citizen to face certain prosecution, to be stripped naked and executed by their laws. Return alone? To die quietly on Sulla's list decades later? I refused. I had worked too hard. And so, on the night of January 10th, 49 BC, I stood on the banks of a miserable little creek called the Rubicon. It was a line drawn in the sand, separating my province of Gaul from Italy itself. A meaningless, muddy stream. But it was everything. To cross it was treason. To stay was certain death. I stood there in the chilling mist, looking back at my legions, the men who breathed and bled for me. I looked forward at the fragile, beautiful, dying republic I had sworn to uphold. I looked at my general, Labienus, the man who had marched with me for 8 years, who now crossed back to join Pompey. Even my own commanders betrayed me before I crossed. I remember the cold silence. The wind rustled the leaves. I looked up at the sky and muttered the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times. Alea iacta est. The dice are cast. I put my foot in the water. I crossed the Rubicon. And in that one act, the Republic died. It wasn't a choice for dictatorship. It was a choice for survival. I chose my own life over the hypocrisy of their laws. I chose the reality of my power over the illusion of their freedom. The civil war began. I defeated Pompey, my former friend and son-in-law, at Pharsalus. I hunted him across the world like an animal. And when I finally stood as the undisputed master of Rome, the dictator perpetuo, I was tired. So tired. I sought something that was not marble, not gold, not power. I found Cleopatra. They rushed me. The knives were everywhere. 23 of them. They came from every direction, sharp, cold, desperate. I fought back, screaming, until I saw Brutus, my protege, the man I loved like a son, the son of my mistress Servilia. When I saw his face, the mask of betrayal, the righteous madness in his eyes, I stopped fighting. I put my toga over my face. It was not worth the effort. It too, Brute. Those were not words of pain. They were words of realization, the ultimate clarity. My whole life, I had fought the weakling I was born to be. I had sacrificed millions to become the most powerful man on earth. I had risked everything to cross the line. And in the end, I was destroyed not by a million Gauls, not by the mighty Pompey, not by a storm on the sea, but by my own blind trust in the concept of Clementia. I died as I lived, bleeding on the floor of the Senate, betrayed by my own arrogance. My body was carried through the streets. They burned my corpse in the forum. The fire was so vast, so hot, it burned away the past. My murderers claimed freedom. They claimed to save Rome. But the moment I fell, the Republic fell with me. There was no going back. I had crossed the Rubicon for all of them. If you remember me, remember this. I was not a king. I was a man who saw chaos and chose order. I was a man who saw laws and chose life. My final victory was not in Gaul. It was not in Rome. It was in the simple fact that my name, Caesar, became the title of every emperor who followed me. Kaiser, Tsar, Tsar. You tried to erase me, but you only made me eternal.